Welcome to the Property Buyer Podcast, where we explore the world of residential and commercial real estate to help you make better decisions about buying, selling, or investing in all types of property. Join me, Rich Harvey, CEO of propertybuyer.com.au and multi-award-winning buyer's advocate. Our podcast features expert interviews, market trends and insights, and practical tips for navigating the complex world of Australian real estate. Whether you're a home buyer, a seasoned property investor, commercial buyer, developer, or simply curious about the property market, our podcast is for you. Join us as we share our knowledge, strategies, and experience and help you achieve your property goals. Well, welcome to another edition of the Property Buyer Podcast. Brisbane has been a strong performer in the Australian property market the last few years, with double-digit growth in 2024. Originally seen as a large country town, it's matured into a world-class city and now the third largest in Australia. But what is driving this growth and development? And does it have the legs to continue? To help unpack the future drivers of the Brisbane property market and examine the trends, the hotspots, the price forecasts, we have Glen Sainsbury, Property Buyer's Principal Buyer's Advocate and Team Leader for South East Queensland. Now, Glen is an expert in the residential property market in Queensland and has vast experience and been personally involved in more than 2,500 transactions, making him one of the highest transacting agents in the last 20 years. Glen is also a high-level negotiator who's trained scores of other property professionals on the art of strategic negotiation. Great to have you on the podcast, Glen.
Hi, Rich. That's a lovely intro. Hope everything's going well, and hello to the listeners.
Thanks, Glen. Glen, you might know we have a little tradition with the Property Buyer Podcast where I ask you a quote, and today's quote is, "Challenges are what makes life interesting, and overcoming them is what makes life meaningful." Joshua Marine. What do you take from that quote, Glen?
Look, that's actually a great quote, Rich. Just remembering, though, I am a property expert, not a philosophy expert. But certainly for me, I suppose challenges are part of being human. I mean, I tell my kids when things come up, a few thousand years ago, our ancestors were worried about enough food, enough water, and who or what was going to kill them that day. Yeah. So the challenges that we have today, certainly are a lot less monumental than what have been faced in the past. So they overcame those in the past, and that's why we're here today. And so the less meaningful challenges that we have today really pale in comparison. And we've got to try and keep things, when they come up, in a fair amount of perspective. So challenges are necessary in life. We're lucky to have them. Without them, I suppose, we remove the essence of probably what being human is. We can't control things that happen, but we can't have the good and we can't have those successes without having some form of suffering or something that we've had to overcome. Life would be pretty bland, I suppose, if it was devoid of feeling, devoid of successes, devoid of challenges and devoid of failures. And look, I totally resonate with that quote, actually, because it's what makes life fairly meaningful. But interestingly, just before we move on to the fun stuff, the property stuff, I think the most successful people that I personally know actually embrace what happens to them and they don't shy away from challenges. To become successful, they've had to pretty much overcome more challenges than the average person, and that's why they are where they are. When you don't get to look like Arnold Schwarzenegger without years of suffering in the gym, it's the same in every other facet of life as well. Challenge and suffering provide a reward, and in life we're going to lose sometimes and we're going to win sometimes, and those wins are pretty sweet.
That's great, Glen. Well, I think it just builds character, I think is what you're alluding to, and it makes life very colourful. That's great. Look, really great answer to that. So let's get into the property stuff, Glen. Tell me firstly, just in the context of being a buyer's agent, what do you love about being a buyer's agent, and how long have you been in the real estate game for?
Yeah, so look, I've been in real estate. It's actually my 25th year this year, so I am showing my age. But most certainly, I've been involved in a number of facets of property over the years, including sort of graduating through to medium-scale property developments. But the best thing about buyer's agency is we get to, I think, have one of the most valuable and one of the most rewarding jobs, if you want to call it a job, because it's really it's a passion in all of real estate, because we get the ability to genuinely help clients, being able to secure properties that align with their goals, whether it's a family home or whether it's an investment, and making sure we achieve those parameters for them. And look, there's nothing more rewarding than guiding people through what can be a very stressful process with a lot of moving parts and delivering those outcomes that are going to exceed their expectations and put smiles on their faces.
Yeah, that's great. Love that. I mean, one of the best parts of my job is just reading the testimonials that my team provide after they've satisfied a client. It's such a great achievement. But,
look, there's no greiter feeling.
Yeah,
it really isn't.
Looking back about the property market over the last year in Brisbane, can you just give us a quick snapshot of what's been the Brisbane property market like? This past year, not the future. We're going to come to that, but just over the last year, what's it been like in Brisbane?
Look, the Brisbane market has been strong and consistent. I mean, it's seen double-digit growth across many suburbs, and that's driven by that strong demand, limited supply of properties into the market, and obviously significant interstate migration. So the demand was particularly evident in suburbs near those employment clusters, and those suburbs with a diverse array of those accessible amenities. So there's areas benefiting from ongoing infrastructure projects in Brisbane, of course, but often we don't see buyers buying for that future infrastructure. We see them actually buying for what is on ground and available to them today. So whilst Brisbane's average was double-digit growth, for some of the areas, at the end of the day, just from a property buyer perspective, the areas that we recommended for our clients have actually seen towards 20% growth. Wow. And that's why many of them are coming back so quickly to purchase further. So when you put some science behind where you're buying, particularly for investors, Brisbane is an extremely rewarding place, and like all cities, there are markets and micro markets within them, and some wonderful, consistent opportunities.
Okay. How do you describe, I guess, just the character, without getting into the nuts and bolts of suburbs and everything, but just the general character of Brisbane as a city compared to, say, Sydney or Melbourne? You know, there's often rivalries, isn't there, between the different cities, but how do you describe Brisbane?
Well, look, in terms of how I would describe Brisbane, I think from a person who has lived in Sydney for a couple of years before being up here now for over 20 years, I would say it is very much a lifestyle-driven location. We've got great weather. We've got a wonderful quality of life. Whilst traffic can be a problem at times, it's certainly not to the levels of other cities. We have a wonderful, diverse array of facilities and amenities here. I don't think Brisbane people miss out on anything that other major cities have. We've got an amazing array of employment as well, and that's something that's really come on in the last 10 to 15 years. The diversity of employment, those future-proof industries, and our wage growth is really, really strong. So we sort of get to have our cake and eat it. We get the lifestyle, we get the livability, we get to live in high-quality housing. There are affordable options closer to the CBD. We don't have to travel an hour and have long commutes, to be able to exist and live within Brisbane. Yeah. And then on top of that, obviously, when we are getting paid reasonable amounts of money as a whole, and the wages are strong, it just gives you a wonderful quality of life.
It used to be that people moved to Queensland because it's cheaper, but then they'd suffer a wage drop. But I think because since COVID, I think the wages level has certainly equalised, and we've seen significant migration, which we'll come to in a minute. But I definitely think that Brisbane market's got a lot of attraction. Every time I come up to Brisbane and visit the team, it's wonderful. I always think it's a really progressive city. You've got a progressive council. All that area around South Bank there is fantastic for running and walking. It's got a really nice lifestyle appeal, as you say, Glenn.
Absolutely.
Tell us about, I guess, the current state of the market. I'd like to ask you, just for our listeners, what's the median price at the moment across Brisbane for a house compared to a unit? And how does this sort of number compare to other cities around Australia?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is a very interesting question, and it's probably a little bit of a bugbear of mine because it's a very difficult metric for outsiders to be able to quantify. So a bit of a trick for those with less knowledge of Brisbane. There actually are a number of conflicting figures around these median prices dependent on what data you use and what metrics and geography they are assessing. So simplifying this for our listeners, when they quote figures from Brisbane, they're often looking at the Brisbane City Council area. So we have super councils here, unlike places like Sydney. With our councils have those large geographies. So we actually have some of the largest local government areas by area in the world. So within 20 or 25 minutes from the Brisbane CBD, there are adjacent council areas which are still part of Greater Brisbane, but often the data is a little different, and a lot of the data sometimes reflects just the Brisbane LGA. So as of this month, the median house price in the Brisbane LGA is about $974,000. Now, if you count surrounding LGAs, those that form part of the metropolitan area, it comes down to $850,000. So for units, while units are sitting around $622,000 in the Brisbane LGA, they actually come down to $520,000 when you incorporate the wider Brisbane metropolitan area. So it does remain significantly more affordable than Sydney, and obviously many parts of Melbourne as well. So, but we do see that affordability much greater in adjacent LGAs, and we are seeing capital growth in many instances outperforming Brisbane LGA, and that's because of jobs growth and a number of other factors.
Interesting numbers, and I think comparing to, say, Melbourne, which has a median price of just over $1 million, about $1,034,000, and Sydney at 1.65, you can see that, Brisbane's overall median house price is about, over 60% cheaper than Sydney. And it's never been that big a gap. So that's where there's a big value proposition, I think, Glenn, for a lot of both home buyers and investors thinking about the Sunshine State, just in terms of prices. But talking of prices, Glenn, last year, how far did Brisbane prices kick along? How much did they rise?
Yeah, so in 2024, look, Brisbane experienced a price increase of around 12% for houses and around 8% for units. But the growth was fueled, obviously, by that good, strong population migration, that fundamental undersupply of housing that we've got here. We've got infrastructure investment, and we've obviously got, a vast array of new employment opportunities, which, again, are providing that affluency to give it capacity to grow.
Okay. And has there been much volatility in price increases over the last decade? Like, has there been, a lot of growth in houses and not much in apartments, or vice versa? Just describe the price volatility for me.
Absolutely. So as a whole, over the past decade, Brisbane's been relatively steady in its growth compared to the boom-bust cycles perhaps seen in places like, other capital cities. Houses have consistently outperformed units over that last 10 years due to that stronger owner-occupied demand. What I would say is, housing-wise, from 2016 to around the start of COVID, we weren't seeing massive material gains, but since COVID, we have seen that consistency. And that also aligns with the employment growth, the migration, and other factors that are placing a lot of pressure on the Brisbane market. But from a unit perspective, it's a lot different, and people must really understand this and not fall into the expectation that units are just a license to print money. So from 2016 through to around 2021, there was quite an oversupply of apartments, and we did not see price growth. We saw very much a flatlining price growth metric occurring. Now, what we see in Brisbane, being a less mature market than a Sydney or a Melbourne, is very prone to oversupply and undersupply. So what has happened since that oversupply, which peaked around end of 2016, early 2017, is it needed time for the supply or for the demand to catch up to that supply. So what has happened more recently is demand has actually caught up to that supply, because like anything economically, if we're in an oversupply of apartments, there's going to be less apartments built, then demand perpetually will catch that. And we're in the situation now where over the last 12 months, we have seen units in some areas outperforming their housing markets purely because we are seeing now demand exceeding that supply. The one thing I would quantify is, say, I look out my window now and I look at all the cranes back in the sky in Brisbane. And, really the apartment market works in windows, and the window now is very strong. But would I see a long-term window of the same trajectory? Absolutely not. Once the supply is back on ground again, it will experience those same issues of having that supply back on ground, diluting that demand. Even though demand is increasing, we will still be going through those cycles in that unit market for the foreseeable future.
Okay. That's great. Really good summary, Glenn. And just talking of demand, I think there's probably several. I'd love to unpack the factors that are driving the Brisbane market. And I guess I've got a couple of things I want to ask you about, particularly infrastructure, migration, the Olympics, and just the economy. But just kick it off. Like, what are the key infrastructure projects that are going to drive demand, do you think, in the next decade or so?
Well, obviously, I'm a bit of a believer that Brisbane, independent of these new infrastructure projects, is going to still have that strong consistency of demand. A lot of the infrastructure projects that we see, like things like Cross River Rail and Brisbane Metro, they are already priced into those markets that it directly benefits maybe a year or two ago. There are future infrastructure things that are happening for Brisbane that haven't been priced in yet, and they are happening not just in the inner city, but also happening in some of the middle suburban markets as well. Now, Brisbane, unfortunately, because we are on city-wise, we're in a river peninsula. There is only a limited capacity for Brisbane as a city to grow, but some of the areas that are outside of the CBD are experiencing monumental amounts of infrastructure. And people do talk Cross River Rail, they talk Brisbane Metro, and they talk Queen's Wharf when they talk Brisbane. And it's certainly Queen's Wharf in particular is certainly evolving Brisbane into that real world-class entertainment and lifestyle destination. But there's places like Greater Springfield, which have had $18 billion worth of infrastructure go into them, but they actually have another $67 billion worth of infrastructure going into that area out there half an hour from Brisbane. So there are not many places in Australia, and there are certainly not many places in Brisbane that have $67 billion worth of infrastructure going in there on an ongoing basis over the next 10 or 15 years. So we are very strong around infrastructure, and that's something that will underpin Brisbane moving forward. But independent of that infrastructure, because of what Brisbane is offering, again, back to that employment, back to the things that we've spoken about, lifestyle, fundamental undersupply of housing, that's what's sustaining this Brisbane market moving forward.
Fascinating. Yeah, I think, as I said, I really like that Queen Street precinct. It's fantastic, really great restaurants there. But tell me about interstate migration. I think the numbers, I don't have it at my fingertips, Glenn, but I think it was about 110,000 people moved to South East Queensland. So that's Gold Coast, Brisbane and Sunny Coast. But how much does that sort of level of migration and population growth in general drive property demand?
Well, look, it has been effectively a cornerstone of Brisbane's growth, and it's not just been recently, it's been over the last 20 years. You know, there's been that large influx of people, particularly from New South Wales and Victoria, that do seek the affordability and the lifestyle of Brisbane. Probably what we've seen more recently, though, is people are moving up here for employment, seeking those new opportunities in an expanding city. There's firms that are establishing themselves here that previously may not have looked at Brisbane as having the critical mass to be able to be a profitable centre. And we've also looked at, when we look at that migration, I mean, we even look at the overseas migration. I know in the southern states, a lot of your migration that comes in is varied, but we have a higher proportion of skilled migrants that are coming from overseas here. So whilst our interstate migrants are moving up, and it's a powerful factor, when we look at our overseas migration, there is a lot of skilled migrants, and there's a lot of business visas. So it's not certainly people that are coming in and just hitting the rental market. There is a lot of people there that are coming in and are actually, purchasing property and helping that demand. So the combined migration levels are certainly underpinning Brisbane and also placing pressure on that housing supply.
Fantastic. Now, I've got to ask you the big question, Glenn, drum roll, the Olympics, right? Everyone's talking about the Olympics in Brisbane for 2032 and being touted as going to have an incredible impact on the market. What's your take on that sort of discussion, and is there any kind of hotspots you think might come from the Olympics?
We really appreciate you tuning in to the Property Buyer Podcast, and I hope that you're finding our expert interviews helpful. So that we can keep providing this information and growing our audience, we rely on word-of-mouth recommendations. If you found this information useful, could I please ask you to share this podcast with your friends, family and colleagues, and ask them to subscribe to the Property Buyer Podcast. It would be a big help, and we'd be very grateful for your support. Thanks once again for sharing the links. And now, let's get back to the podcast.
Yeah, well, look, everybody has a different opinion on the Olympics, and it will be interesting to see where the cards fall, but it will be a game changer for the city. It's not just the event itself, obviously. It's the long-term legacy it's going to leave in terms of infrastructure and facilities. Obviously, the global recognition that Brisbane will receive as well. When I've been overseas, they've heard of Sydney, Melbourne, Gold Coast. They would have never heard of Brisbane. So it will highlight and put the city into the fore. So, look, what I would say, I'm a believer that the Olympics, apart from when you look at history and you look at the benefits of housing markets and property markets in other cities that have experienced Olympic events, that aside, I do see that it will benefit the city in a few ways, but it also poses some risks for some of the markets within the city in some ways. So, again, back to when we spoke about the apartment market and the oversupply and undersupply, there is going to be a second wave of building around that 2028 mark within that, particularly the apartment market. Now, that's going to supply a lot of dwellings on ground, and there is going to be an inevitable hangover where those dwellings will have to be absorbed into the market. The other thing with the Olympics at the moment is, while some venues have been announced, our primary venues still have yet to be decided. So the Queensland government is currently in their 100-day review. We don't know whether we're having an Olympic stadium in Victoria Park, whether we're having an Olympic stadium at the Gabba. It was originally going to be back at Nathan. It's a complete joke and a farce, but at the same time, that will be very strong for us when we understand where that is, and then we'll be able to look at those direct impacts. But there's extended impacts as well, such as the Sunshine Coast, which I'm sure we may speak about shortly, where they are going to fast track the rail line directly through to Brisbane and other things. So I don't think it's going to materially benefit the housing market in a way to any monumental degree. The factors in place that we've previously discussed is what is going to drive that housing market. So I think there's risk around apartments and where to be buying apartments and that supply issue. But it will assist. But how far it's going to assist the overall property market remains to be seen.
Fantastic, Leo. Really, really good advice there. And just the local economy of South East Queensland and Brisbane, how stable is it, and what role does that play in supporting and sustaining the property market, do you think?
Absolutely. Look, in terms of what we see up here in Brisbane, the economy's thriving. The sectors now that are in Brisbane in terms of employment, particularly those future-proof industries of health, technology, advanced manufacturing, education, they are absolutely booming. The decentralisation of the employment hubs across South East Queensland as well, including areas like Greater Springfield that we've spoken about, places like North Lakes, Chermside. The Port of Brisbane is growing exponentially. We're seeing the airport precinct growing exponentially. It's really, really exciting in terms of the employment and the health of our overall economy here. Now, certainly we are seeing affluency, we are seeing good incomes, and we expect that to further strengthen, and it becomes a self-perpetuating cycle when you've got industries that are thriving, growing, when you've got good jobs, good incomes, and that then, creates the capacity for more to align and to come in and move in beside those. So we do really value where and how far the economy has come in Brisbane, and the type of future-proof industries that we've now got, which will underpin us for generations to come.
Fantastic. And I've got to say, I've got to compliment the way you use the word affluency. I was thinking, having a laugh in my head then about the way Kath and Kim used to say the word effluent when they meant to say affluent. So there's a little side joke. But
yeah, well, look, I'm from the country, so it's probably taken me 20 years to not say it the way Kath and Kim say it. I'm now getting pretty city-fied in my old age.
Love it, mate. Love it. So I want to talk about some suburbs and really give our listeners a bit of an insight into specific areas that you think are going to be really good for both home buyers and investors, Glenn. But yeah, which suburbs do you think are sort of in the highest demand? Like, do you think it's the inner city hubs like New Farm or those other areas like Springfield? What's showing up in the radar at the moment?
Well, look, obviously different markets and different price points, they have their own individual markets where we are seeing strength. To the north, areas like Banyo, we're seeing really good strength in because it's relatively affordable. Location-wise, it's fairly strategic, close to the airport, close to places like Chermside, city access, and you've got that good array of stock. You've got your more modern style dwellings dotted amongst your more traditional housing, variance in lot sizes. Those sort of areas are thriving, and certainly from a stock supply level, people aren't really just selling there unless they've got a material reason. Over in the west, there's areas that provide really strong affordability, and places like the Ipswich local government area have seen very, very strong growth, in part to that significant employment. Places like Redbank Plains to the west has been a star of the market. Near to Springfield, it's adjacent to more expensive suburbs. It's got homes effectively below their replacement cost now that land prices are growing, construction prices have grown considerably and remain under pressure. So we are seeing some really strong star performing areas and areas that we would consider hotspots. And interestingly, back to Greater Springfield again, they actually have a higher proportion of households out there in the medium highest and highest income quartile groups than the rest of Greater Brisbane. So because of the type of employment out there and because of the industries and so forth, we see people there that actually earn more money per household than what the rest of Greater Brisbane does, yet their property prices are more affordable. So places like Redbank Plains, which is only 5 to 10 minutes drive from Springfield, with much more affordable property pricing, is really benefiting, and we're watching that really strong demand.
That's great, talking about those emerging hotspots. And I guess, are you also seeing any sort of change in growth because of the attraction or the proximity to the Gold Coast or the Sunny Coast? Are those sort of pockets, say, between Brisbane and Gold Coast or Sunshine Coast and Brisbane, like North Lakes area, are they kind of also up and coming as well, do you think?
Oh, absolutely. So when we look at North Lakes, it's a definition of what we would call a maturing area. So 15 years ago, there was still home and land packages. Stockland was still releasing land. But what's happened, particularly since 2015, we have seen that land supply now completed. The suburb is complete. It's had rail infrastructure go in. It's got your Costco's. It's got your Ikeas. It's got your Westfields. It's got jobs growth. It's got very, very good schools. And it is a very much owner-occupied driven market. So that is a very strong market. It is a major employment hub, both of wider Brisbane as well as particularly a very big anchor point up on that northern area of Brisbane. And we do expect, as it has been, for it to continue to perform for various reasons. And it's also fairly close to the water. And again, lifestyle-wise, aesthetics-wise, it was very well protected by Stockland in terms of how home and land packages had to be developed. So we love driving through that. We love watching those owner occupiers competing every weekend, and when they do, that's where they overpay, and when they overpay, we see that price growth. Conversely, down to the south, there's obviously areas from Coomera, Pimpamar, Ormo, those areas that they have been performing really, really well. We do love those areas, but at the same time, we've just got to caveat the fact that Coomera will have quite a volume of land supply moving forward. So we always need to be conscious of that. We need to be conscious of areas that have further land supply. But if we're in areas of finite supply, they are doing really well. Places like Loganholme, places like Beenleigh as a suburb, those areas certainly are performing well, and the southern side of Brisbane will continue to perform well, primarily because a lot of it, with the exception of Coomera, is dealing with finite supply of land.
Okay. Great stuff, Glenn. Tell me about the top end of the market. So I want to talk about the luxury property market. So where are the buyers coming from, and what are they looking to buy? Like areas like Ascot, Hamilton or West End, Highgate Hill, are they still in really top demand, or what are you seeing in that end of the market?
Yeah, look, the luxury market in Brisbane is thriving. I mean, you could argue compared to southern states that the type of home you get here in the luxury market for the money you have to pay provides outstanding value. But you've got a real demand from the growing market of professionals in Brisbane, people now on high-paying employment. You've got a lot of successful business operators around Brisbane. You've obviously got that interstate and also overseas migration. There's also those, though, that have just spent a generation in the property market up here, and they've experienced strong equity gains. So, you really got that good mass now of buyers, and they are willing to pay because they are very much experiencing that affluency. And a lot of people perceive it still, compared to southern states, as providing value. So, areas like Auchenflower have done really well this year. Ascot, Hamilton continues to perform. Wilston continues to perform, and Windsor, Paddington and Highgate Hill are seeing that consistent growth. Buyers are drawn more to the modern and fully renovated offerings. They're drawn to the high-end finishes, and they're also just drawn to the lifestyle associated with some of these suburbs.
Sounds great. Makes me want to move there, mate. Tell me about the Gold Coast market. How would you describe the mood of the Gold Coast market, and are there any opportunities, do you think, for buyers in that area?
Look, yeah, the Gold Coast has been going well. It's probably exceeded people's expectations over the last few years. It's been going well, including the apartment sector, which has traditionally been something that has been very cyclical and very boom and bust. The prestige markets have been doing well, and look, some argue that they may continue to perform, as certainly there is interstate and overseas money that continues to pour into those areas. But we do feel at some stage those prestige markets will have a bit of a ceiling, and we do think that that's probably in the not too distant future. So we don't think we're going to see perpetual increases in prices, because a lot of those prestige homes are far more expensive than what you will find in Brisbane. They do have a growing economy on the Gold Coast and a diversifying economy, but again, at the same time, we don't feel it's got the same critical mass of extreme affluency and sustainable amounts of high-paying employment than what the capital city of Brisbane might have. So
that's a really good point, Glenn, about the income capacity, because that is still a factor. I've noticed that as well, that the average household income is lower on the Gold Coast of Brisbane, and that does a direct impact on the property market, as you said.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Glenn, tell me about the Sunshine Coast. I mean, sometimes it's a bit unknown and talked about. People have heard of Noosa, right? But there's a lot of other great suburbs. What's attracting buyers to the sunny coast, and what's its prospects like?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, look, it's always been a lifestyle-driven location. You're either a Gold Coast person or a Sunshine Coast person, and many people do love the more relaxed feel of the Sunshine Coast. But interestingly, like all South East Queensland areas, their economy is growing, particularly around tech and particularly around health. So that is helping it sort of move into its next phase, that from being that purely lifestyle and tourism-driven to having sort of its own legs and being able to sustain a little bit more consistency moving forward. So, the first couple of years into COVID, the market performed outstanding, and then it took a real breath once people decided they need to move back and they had the free access again. But this year we've seen good consistency in Butterham, Mountain Creek, beachside areas like Woodsvilla and Marcoola, and Maroochydore, which we're very bullish bullish on is certainly been a consistent performer as well. But many parts of that Sunshine Coast market are patchy in their growth, and you've just, from a property point of view, you need to take a fairly long-term view there when you are, with the exception of a few suburbs. But yeah, you've just got to take a little bit of a long-term view when we are looking at the Sunshine Coast.
Okay, fantastic. And Glenn, I want to talk about the rental market in Brisbane. Tell me what's been happening. Have rental yields been rising due to population? What's going on with vacancy rates, and what's the sort of tenancy demand like?
Yeah, well, look, the rental market is under significant pressure. Record low vacancy rates are still there. They are starting to ease in some areas, but rents are rising, particularly in those affordable. The under $1,000 a week rentals. There is a lot of pressure on those. There is very, very strong demand. I mean, we settled a property on Wednesday. There was a rental inspection yesterday, and I think there's 5 applications on the property today. And there's just very, very strong demand, and we're also seeing good rent increases, particularly under $750 a week. We're seeing 8 to 14% rental increases a year. As we get towards the $1,500 a week, $2,000 a week rentals, they are not seeing that similar level of median price growth, but they are seeing some level of price growth. So effectively, the more affordable end, where the vast majority of people can afford, they are flying, and it's really hard to see where they will stop. The only qualification I would say is when you are looking at very fringe areas of Brisbane, areas where you are going to see hundreds, if not thousands, more homes being built and developed. We see those areas not having the same pressure on those markets, and we do see those areas flatlining, and also vacancy rates increasing as that supply that the government is very much pushing to get on ground starts to occur.
Fantastic. You're a font of knowledge, Glenn. This is brilliant. I want to now just get your crystal ball out.
Can you tell my wife that, by the way?
Absolutely, mate. I want to just get your crystal ball, so start polishing it for our audience here. What's your overall prediction for the Brisbane property market? So if I've got a gun to your head and say, Glenn, you've got to tell me, what are you expecting to see Brisbane rise in 2025? What number would be the first number that comes into your head?
Look, I'm fairly pessimistic in all my predictions, and when I say pessimistic, I never like to overestimate. So I think as a whole, as an average, we're going to grow between 6 and 9% for houses and 6 and 10% for units just for the next year, and that's driven by that sustained population growth, under supply, affluency and other factors. But however, averages are not going to tell you what you could achieve. They are default, and some areas we feel will find around that 15%, possibly more, in terms of overall growth. So there are markets there that are going to do really well, and there are markets that are certainly not going to do as well, and it's being able to understand the science behind why, which will be the difference.
Really good point you make about medians hiding the averages, and that's why it's certainly important to use a buyer's agent to help you pick the high-performing suburbs, not the low and average-performing suburbs, because that local knowledge makes a world of difference. Now, I've got another question for you. Gold Coast, what is your prediction for Gold Coast property price rises or increases or changes next year? What do you think?
Yeah, so the Gold Coast, I think, should see growth around sort of that 5 to 7% range. Could be a little bit higher, but being my conservative self, I feel that that's a very safe bet, particularly in areas benefiting from those infrastructure upgrades, and obviously those that continue with the lifestyle appeal. The prestige market, particularly suburbs like Broadbeach Waters, up towards Sovereign Island and things like that, I expect they'll thrive still for the next 12 months, but again, I do see that there is a future ceiling there. So whether that will be consistent thereafter remains to be seen. The apartment market's interesting. I still think we're going to see good growth there. However, there's been 40,000 apartments approved on the Gold Coast that haven't been built, and there's a real push to get them on ground. The existing stock on the Gold Coast is actually a lot more affordable than a lot of the new stock going into the market. So whilst we are seeing supply levels increase there, and that is a concern, we are seeing a variance because the cost to develop that stock and bring it to market is often meaning that they're released at prices more expensive than what the established market is. So it's almost two tiers, probably a swear word in the property market, but we're seeing two pricing levels there, and I think the established market will continue to perform.
Got it. So Glenn, I just got one or two more questions for you. If you could give our audience the best property tip or something you've learnt in the past about investment property, what would it be today?
Look, I think if you're looking at buying for investment, you've got to invest in areas with strong lead indicators. And first of all, you've got to know what strong lead indicators are. There is so much data out there. Some of it's conflicting, some of it's confusing, and some of it doesn't relate to property price growth. And that's the big misnomer. Some people can get bogged down with information. So you've got to look at purely just those few factors that do lead through to price growth. We want to make sure vacancy rates are good, but effectively you want to try and simplify a complicated process. And also, properties are like human beings. None of us are going to be perfect, whether you're buying at $600,000 or $7 million or $15 million. If you're buying at $15 million, you mightn't be able to find one with a helipad on the roof. Unfortunately, it's all about slight levels of compromise. And to a degree, when we are looking at properties, the perfect property may exist, but it's more likely that we are going to have to make a few compromises. And so keeping those in mind, finding those with the least amount of compromises is better than trying to find the absolute perfect property, because they are like people. They are, certainly, they rarely exist out there in the world. And I'm talking about the property that's perfect for you, by the way, not necessarily, the property that, to us, who are property professionals, we see it as ideal. We're talking about properties that are perfect for you in your situation at the moment.
Fantastic, Glenn. And I guess another last question to finish on is timing. I get asked every day of the week, Rich, is it a good time to enter the market? Should I buy now or should I wait for the market to drop? What's going to happen with interest rates? What's going to happen with this? And, my view is, look, again, you can't always pick the perfect timing. I say, and my advice is, buy when you can afford to buy and hold for the long term. Investment property is a long-term game. You can make money flipping if you know what you're doing, but trying to time your perfect entry is like trying to be an Olympic diver without making a splash and get a 10 out of 10. You've actually got to take the plunge at some point. But what's your advice around timing, Glenn?
Well, look, we're property professionals. Of course, we're going to say the best time is now, but that's because we live it and breathe it every day, and we see what happens out there in the market every day. But the reality is, particularly in Queensland, there is no time like the present. If you're on a budget, particularly under $1 million, every month you wait, you're watching your borrowing power erode. You might as well have the growth on your table, getting your asset growing in value, than waiting on the outside, waiting for the sky to fall in or waiting for prices to drop, because Queensland is a very unique market. To me, it is the most consistent market in the country and will be for the foreseeable future. There is just no capacity to wait. The longer you wait, even with, you might say, well, I'm going to wait for my interest rates to, start coming down before I buy. But by then, the growth that would have occurred where you're going to buy would have offset that. So it's really important that you get in now. I know we're property people, and you can always take that with a grain of salt, but that's the reality for Queensland. It's not property speak. That's just the pure facts of the matter. It is important to make the move as soon as practically possible.
Well, Glen Sainsbury, team leader for South East Queensland for Propertybuyer, thank you so much for being with us today. Really thank you for sharing your knowledge. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Rich. Have a great day. Appreciate it, and to all the listeners.
And to everybody out there, thank you again for listening to another edition of the Propertybuyer Podcast. Can I please ask you to share this podcast link with a friend or family member so you can spread the word of getting independent advice to help you on your property journey? And we look forward to sharing it.
Thanks for being with us on another Propertybuyer Podcast. If you have a question you'd like to ask, please click on the SpeakPipe link and we'll answer this during the next episode. If you're looking to buy a residential or commercial property in the near future and would like to get the added advantage of having a buyer's advocate on your side, then please reach out to my team today and send us your inquiry, and we'd be delighted to help. please visit our website at propertybuyer.com.au, where you can stay updated with all my latest market updates, weekly blogs and live suburb profiles to help you make better property decisions. We look forward to connecting with you again on the next Property Buyer Podcast.